Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? Video game scalpers have been around for a long time, and it's a topic that many people get upset about. But are they really all that bad? And if so, is there anything we can do about it? This topic was really prompted by a recent podcast episode I did on the release of the NES Classic, and specifically how it pretty much sold out the day that it launched. And you may want to check that video out. I'll include a link down in the description. It talks more about why I think it sold out. But that video ended up becoming very popular and amassed a lot of comments down below of people sharing their experiences trying to get their hands on an NES Classic on launch day. And there were, unfortunately, were several stories in those comments about people going to stores, waiting in line just to have that store's stock, either some of it or all of it, purchased by people who would turn around and flip the items on eBay for a profit. Unfortunately, this is nothing new, and not only is it not new to the video game industry, but it's not new to pretty much anything else. Scalping or reselling is something that cuts across all sorts of industries, and it really only occurs when supply on something is very limited and there's more demand for it. So it's basically just people getting their hands on those products and marking them up, sometimes dramatically, and hoping that someone who desperately wants one will be willing to fork out the money. Of course, it's become more common as time has gone on, I think, not necessarily because it's easier to get these rare items, but I think it's because it's easier to sell them. If you look on eBay, I looked on eBay right before I started filming this one, and I saw a large number of NES Classics listed. The average selling price for those, for items that actually sold, was $200. Now, consider the fact that the NES Classic in the US sold at retail for $60. That's a pretty big markup. And it's not like there were, just 2 or 3 NES Classics that sold on eBay. Dozens of them were sold, and $200 was the average. Sometimes they went for a little less, sometimes they went for a bit more. Of course, you've got the occasional seller who's just going to go for the moonshot approach, and I saw a couple of NES Classics listed for like $4,000, $5,000. They're not going to sell at that price. They just simply aren't. But finding ones for anywhere between $160 and $240, at the time I'm filming this at least, there's quite a few of them. And those prices seem to kind of self-regulate. Mostly because those prices are public because they're on eBay. It's not like you're trying to find some dude in a trench coat in a back alley, willing to, hey man, I got a thing for you, So I think scalping in general is more common now because it's just so much easier to sell them. People think there's less work involved, and I think having like an official place to sell goods in general, like eBay, kind of gives it less of a stigma, maybe, of it, the way it used to be with kind of a back alley deal. I can tell you this. I live in the state of Minnesota, and for a very long time, scalping tickets to events and concerts and stuff like that was illegal. Reselling them was not illegal, but you couldn't sell them for more than face value. So marking them up was illegal. And obviously, because it was illegal, you didn't really see any organized stuff going on. You could find ticket scalpers here. You could. If you wanted tickets to something bad enough, you could find somebody selling them for a marked up price. They were willing to take that risk. But it definitely seemed like it was more of that kind of back alley, shady thing. Eventually, they repealed that law. And now at least where I live here, it's legal to resell tickets for more than face value. And this big industry has popped up. And now you've got like real businesses that manage to get their hands on tickets. And how they get their hands on them is something we'll talk about in a moment. But these like real legit businesses getting their hands on tickets and doing, honest, in quote, sales, where it's not like it's shady. They've got websites and they offer, refunds if something goes wrong. There's oftentimes like a retail location you can walk into and actually, get your hands on the ticket. It's not like you're just sending your money off to somewhere and hoping that tickets show up. These are businesses that pay taxes and all that. Now, in terms of how they get the tickets, I think that's the real point of contention. People seem to get worked up about the fact that these items, anything that's scarce is being sold for more than face value. And there are lots of people, and I think maybe rightfully so, complaining about the NES Classics going on eBay for $200 when they're really supposed to be $60. I don't think really, though, the argument that they have is necessarily about the fact that they're selling for $200. I think it's really more the fact that that item was purchased, that scarce item, I should say, was purchased by someone who only had the intent of turning around and making a profit off of it. I think that's what works people up. It's the whole, like I said at the beginning, people who waited in line to try to get their hands on one of these for themselves. They just wanted to buy one and they just wanted it for themselves to play. But they couldn't get one, even though they did everything right. Even though they got up early, they waited in line, they were honest about it, they didn't cut in line, they didn't cheat anybody else, and yet two people in front of them in line bought up, one or more of these units. And that could have been the unit that the person who legitimately, in quotes, waited in line could have gotten. And that's where I think things really get problematic and where they kind of cross a line. Personally, I don't care if somebody is gonna wait in line and buy one of a scarce thing to turn around and flip, because they're behaving just as legitimately and honestly as anybody else waiting in line, Like when I told the story in the previous podcast episode about my experience going out and buying one. Stock was limited. There were only 6 at that store I went to on launch day, and I was the 6th person in line. Now, I'm lucky in that the people in front of me didn't buy more than one. Although that was kind of a bit of an agreement we all had, and the store manager who brought the box from the back kind of laid out gently. He didn't really say, put a sign out and saying one per person, or say, explicitly, you're only allowed to do one per person as like a store policy. It was really more of just kind of an agreement amongst all of us because there were so few of us, so few available, and, there weren't too many of us waiting there. We, it kind of was just an agreement where we would all just buy one. If one of the people in front of me were buying one to resell, I don't really care because they only bought one. Had the store manager not cared, had there been more people there, had one of the people in front of me had different intentions, maybe not been as honest or whatever, and they had said, yeah, I want to buy the rest of the box of 6, I'd be a bit upset, and there probably would have been some words exchanged about that, because I got up just as early as everybody else. The people waiting in line at the store before it opened, they weren't really waiting there much longer than I was. I talked to them. They had only been there for a few minutes prior before I showed up. So it's not like, they had been waiting since the day before or something like that. But it's that going in and kind of screwing everybody else in line type of action, I think that's really the point of contention that people have about scalpers. And it's kind of the same thing with, like I was talking about with ticket sales. The way that those ticket resale companies work is that they've got special software that allows them to go through and buy up tickets online as soon as they become available. And that's something Amazon actually tried to combat a bit when it opened up sales for the NES Classic. It made them available a little bit later in the day on launch day, but it said in advance, okay, these are going to go live at exactly this time, and we've only got so many. And Amazon even said, and we're going to turn off one-click ordering. And that was done to kind of level the playing field, I think, because it would make everyone go through the checkout process normally. It wouldn't let some people who had one click already set up, ready and waiting so that they could press the button as soon as the orders went live. And it also helped slow down the ability for programs, special software, bots, whatever you want to call it, to go through and try to snatch them all up as quickly as they could. So I think, is there a problem with scalping? To some extent, yes. And I think it really depends on who you ask. It's not a topic that's going to disappear anytime soon. I mean, this is always going to be a thing. There are always going to be occasions where supplies of a popular item are outstripped by demand. And people are going to try and capitalize on that. And some could argue, and I understand the argument, and some would agree with it, that, that's just the nature of a healthy capitalist society. That you do follow the laws of supply and demand and how pricing works and all of that. But I do think there should be limits to it as well. The unfortunate thing, like what I saw in some of the comments on that previous video, is that some of the stores just didn't care. And that's really disturbing. There was one story in a comment about how someone had waited in line at one of the big box stores, and I'm not going to name which one it was because I can't confirm that this happened. But they said that they waited in line at the big box store, and like the first person in line bought up every single NES Classic that the store got in. It was something like 17 of them is all that this store got. And the first person in line told the cashier, I want them all. And the cashier's like, okay, whatever, and sold all of them to that one person. I'm surprised that person didn't get his ass beat on the way out by everyone else waiting in line, but that's kind of another topic. But that's the disturbing thing, is that retailers, at least some retailers in some locations, aren't trying to mitigate some of this. Do they need to mitigate it? No, they don't, because if they sell 17 to one person or one of each to 17 people, the store is going to make the same amount of money, right? So from a pure business perspective, it doesn't matter, but it's a PR thing, right? If word got out that this one particular chain just doesn't give a crap about enforcing quantity limits per person, nobody would bother going there to buy popular items because they knew that they'd just get screwed. What's the point in waiting in line if you knew that the first person in line would most likely be a scalper who would just buy up the entire stock? So it ends up being more of a PR thing, and that's something that I think stores really need to work on. I think manufacturers also could potentially help by putting the screws to those stores and say, look, as a condition of sale, as a condition of us providing you with stock of this very popular and limited quantity item, you have to make sure you're only selling one per person. I don't, if I wait in line for something and stock legitimately runs out before it's my turn, and this has happened before, it sucks, but it is what it is. But if people are getting screwed over. And think of all the other people who were waiting in line to pick one up for their spouse or their significant other or their child. And they were just trying to be nice. You know, that maybe it's a present. Maybe they were going to get it for Christmas. Maybe they were going to get it for some other holiday, or maybe that person's birthday's coming up, whatever. You know, that's when it really starts to suck, is when you've got somebody who's just trying to be nice, trying to do something nice to somebody, and they end up getting screwed. And it wasn't even for them to begin with. So that, I think, is really where all the frustration and anger about scalpers comes into play. It's not that they're buying these things and reselling them. It's that some of them, and not all of them, some of them, you know, I like to think some of them go in and they just buy one, you know, and they've got decent ethics and they decide not to screw everyone else in line. But it's when some of them just get greedy and buy them all up and take advantage of the situation. That's really, I think, where all the angst comes from. So in addition to stores trying to limit quantities, you know, enforcing one per person, that sort of thing, the common advice that everyone has been saying is just don't buy one of them. You know, like don't buy one from a scalper. You know, don't go buy one on eBay for $200. Wait for them to become available in stores again. And yeah, you're going to wait. And yeah, you may miss the holidays. You know, it may end up being a late present, but, you know, you got to get a point across. If nobody bought them from scalpers, then the scalpers would stop doing it because there'd be no profit. But how do you try to get everyone on the same page about not buying them from scalpers and trying to be patient and, you know, fine, you aren't going to get one in time for the holidays and you're going to have to explain to your child, sorry, I couldn't get one of these, they're too popular. I mean, that's a tough position to put somebody in. And that's why people do go and buy them, is because they don't want to let that person, they don't want to let themselves down. They want one and they've got the money and, you know, they are willing to spend it, or they don't want to let that person they were going to give it to down. And again, they've got the money, they're willing to spend it. So it's tough. And that's why I think this is going to be kind of a never-ending battle. We'll see this over and over again. The Switch, you know, Nintendo Switch is probably going to sell out on launch day. And we'll be having this same conversation again about the people who did unscrupulous things in line to try and get them and all that. And sad to say, I think it's just kind of part of the human condition. But, you know, it is what it is. So I am curious, what are your thoughts about this whole thing? I imagine most of you are going to be like, yeah, screw scalpers, but have you gotten burned? You know, do you have a story like that where you waited in line and somebody in front of you bought them all? Have you bought one from a scalper? You know, what was your reasoning behind that? What were the circumstances? I'm curious to know. I don't mean to demonize anyone who actually does buy it. Maybe there are legitimate reasons for doing so. I think that'd be interesting if you're brave enough to own up to that. I am, of course, as always, soliciting feedback and suggestions for future topics. So if there's a topic you'd like me to talk about, be sure to shout that out down in the comments below. If you like the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as I'm trying to negotiate traffic here. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.